The last couple of years have been an interesting period for Ryugakutok Studio. After wrapping up the arc of their main character's legacy within the Yakuza series, the team looked to the stars and shifted their focus to another fascinating project, combining their years of knowledge and development expertise with one of the biggest series to ever grace Japanese pop culture. That's right, it could only be Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, and exclusive for the PlayStation 4. Similar to the source material, Lost Paradise follows Kenshiro as he combs the nuclear-induced post-apocalyptic wasteland in search for his fiancée Yuria. He's tipped off by civilians to the location of Eden, a place where resources are plentiful, law is upheld, and represents his best chance at fighting Yuria. Almost as if on cue, Kenshiro attracts the attention of every bandit and warmonger in the wasteland while he unlocks the secrets behind Eden and the accompanying Sphere City. If you've had any experience with Fist of the North Star, you'll be naturally drawn towards its presentation. While the environments are mostly drab, this fits the wasteland aesthetic and follows the player focus to be entirely fixated on the lovingly crafted character models. The way characters like Kenshiro, Rei, Toki, and Jagi animate are as wonderful as a 2D to 3D transition can muster, especially once they're flipping around and touching all manners of pressure points and there's, particle effects going everywhere. So there's no doubting that the engine powering Yakuza 0 and Kiwami is pushed to its absolute limits here in Lost Paradise. Speaking of which, the engine also allows fighting to be the most free-flowing and intriguing brand of Yakuza-style combat to date. The style Hokuto Shinken feels less like street fighting, but more of a cleverly constructed ballet of bloodshed as you launch into air combos or OTG scoops into finishes. Burst mode opens up even more abilities, and combo options they really encourage you to explore its nuances as you fight enemies. Unfortunately, the enemies can only be described as goony and uninspired damage sponges, omitting the boss battles completely obviously throughout each chapter conclusion, so don't feel too bad if bandits don't pose too much of a challenge, and just treat them like the punching bags they are. Progression within combat feels quite organic, which is surprising for a series where you're playing as a martial arts master. So the rate of leveling and skill acquisition is pretty steady and involving enough that you never really feel bombarded or over-encumbered with the new abilities and button combinations as you level up. However, for the rest of the game's pacing, it can be quite slow to trot the story along, especially around the beginning where you're forced to undergo side quests as means of tutorials or acquiring abilities necessary to proceed in the main storyline. Driving around the wasteland can also take a while getting used to. So while the environments also appear worldly and quite larger, using the buggy feels like cheap buffering between fights and artificially increasing the time it takes to complete fetch quests and having to upgrade your engines, your tires, just to get to those particular areas. And it doesn't really help that the driving model feels pretty strange and odd, which isn't exactly the best endorsement for a studio's members that have had hands in developing some of the best arcade races to ever exist. I mean, this studio has worked on games like Daytona USA, as well as F-Zero GX. So if you're anything like me, your opinion's probably going to sour on anything to do with driving in Lost Paradise. And the game also taking several creative liberties to fit the Yakuza series framework, it also raises the issue of deterring the more conservative fans. So manga and anime buffs might feel a little frustrated with the lack of continuity or the way some characters are introduced and quickly axed from concurrent acts. At times, it kind of feels like the writers tried to give everyone their limelight or their cameo and then abandoned as fast as possible for the next big set piece or the character reveal. So encounters feel less like impactful arcs and more just like busy work. So unfortunately, this is to be expected when you're writing a story from the ground up, and it only loosely follows what Fist of the North Star represents. With a more optimistic point of view though, the game is completely unapologetic in weaving a unique tale and setting a tone that it can call its own. So for the casual fans, the risk that the studio took pays off for the most part, and you can still enjoy the game even if you have the tiniest, slightest knowledge of the manga or anime, and that, in my honest opinion, can at least be commended somewhat. And while I may seem a little bit harsh on Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, I'm only looking out for the long-time fans, as it's a bit more of a tougher pill to swallow than someone who has just dabbled in the series. That said, if you manage to look past the faults of games like Ken's Rage and you opt to switch your brain off, you're still going to find goofy and gory fun within the walls of Eden.